for Pacifica Radio, June the 27th, 2024. I'm Scott Horton. This is Antiwar Radio. All right, y'all, welcome to the show. It is Antiwar Radio. I'm your host, Scott Horton. I'm the editorial director of Antiwar.com and author of the book Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism. You can find my full interview archive, more than 6,000 of them now, going back to 2003, at scotthorton.org, at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show, and wherever they have podcatchers and video sites /Scott Horton Show, you can find it. By the way, today I just finished, a little while ago actually, interviewing Gabriel Shipton, Julian Assange's brother. And so that'll be on the site at scotthorton.org, as well as Eli Clifton on nuclear weapons. But for today's guest on the show, it's Connor Freeman. He is our assistant news editor at the Institute and assistant editor at antiwar.com. And he's also the co-host of Conflicts of Interest with Kyle Anzalone. Welcome back to the show. How you doing, Connor?
I'm doing great, Scott. Thank you very much for having me back on.
Very happy to have you here. So, did you see the new Seymour Hersh piece about the casualty numbers in Gaza?
Yes, I did.
Okay. So my first question for you is, what was in there? Because this is a subject that you and I had been discussing anyway, which is, Jesus, seems like the casualty numbers have not really gone up. In 2 months or something, we got to like low 30,000s or mid 30,000s, and then everything just kind of ground to a halt. Kind of reminds me of when it was only 10,000 killed in Yemen for years, even though it was already in the hundreds of thousands. But then again, I was asking you, well, maybe the tempo of the bombing really has slowed down, or the targeting has become more narrow, or something really has changed. So now my question for you is, what did we learn from Seymour Hersh yesterday?
Sure. So he interviewed a spate of public health experts and people, humanitarian officials, as well as at least one unnamed U.S. official. And the consensus is that these are massive undercounts. What we're seeing from the Gaza Health Ministry, the UN, the European Mediterranean Humanitarian Monitor, as well as other groups. And the message is, and we've also seen this in this latest IPC report, the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification Report, that's the top international watchdog on famine, that basically because of the Israeli operations, because they've dropped 70,000 tons of bombs on Gaza, which is only 25 miles long by 5 miles wide, and because of the unceasing pace of the bombing, they have not been able to get in there and define if, the IPC has not been able to say if there actually is a famine taking place, because they can't get in there to collect the data because of how, the way the war is being carried out against the Palestinians. And the same goes for the actual death toll numbers. I mean, we're talking about, he cites a story from Al Jazeera in February where they were interviewing an undertaker who said he's never buried this many bodies in his life. In all of his years, I think says 30 years in the business, he already said he's buried at least 17,000 people in Gaza by February. And a lot of these people are in mass graves. And he makes the point that there were no public health officials, there were no government officials involved, nobody was taking names down. And so they have to dig a hole that's 30 feet deep and put as many bodies in there as possible. And in many cases, as he says, because of the way the war is carried out, we can't even tell who these people are. They look like boiled potatoes in some cases. They're riddled with so many bullets. He said it looks like Israeli snipers are just shooting their bodies up for target practice. And one of the public health experts that he interviews says that no clear and definite body count is possible given the continuing Israeli bombing. He says that there's no functioning fire department, no fire trucks, no water, no place to escape, no hospitals, no electricity, people living in tents and bodies stacked up all over being eaten by stray dogs. And of course, as everybody who's involved in this says, we need a ceasefire now, not only to prevent the mass starvation which is taking place, because apparently, more than 1 in 5 Palestinians in Gaza right now is at the catastrophic level, the worst level of starvation before death. And they're saying that the famine is going to reach, or at least the starvation level is about to reach over 1 million. because just the way no food especially since May 7th, when they seized the Rafah border crossing and destroyed it. We've seen, there was, I guess, an uptick in the delivery of aid in March and April, but all those gains have been reversed since they decimated Rafah and expelled over 1 million people from that city near the border with Egypt, where about 1.5 or 1.7 million Palestinians who had already been internally displaced throughout the earlier months of the war now are living in these tent cities that are routinely bombed with American supplied weapons, living in tent cities with no aid, no medicine, no infrastructure. They attack the field hospitals, and when they carry out massacres, as they did in the Tal al-Sultan camp in Western Rafah, where they burned 45 people alive, parents, incinerating to death while their children are crying, and children's heads being burned off. What happens is they'll be taken to a hospital, say the next day. This actually happened, and then the Israelis attack that hospital. So then they have to move to another tent camp as many people are able to actually get out of the hospital. Some are left behind. And they go to another place like Al-Mawasi, which has been routinely attacked, even though it was declared a safe zone by the Israeli forces. And then by the time they get there, the field hospital is destroyed or it hasn't been set up. So you have so many people dying just because of the absolute cruelty of the way the war, it's not a war, the way the genocide is being conducted against the Palestinians. We've already seen half of all buildings, according to the UN, more than half of all buildings in the Strip have been destroyed, not just damaged, destroyed. And as I say, there was this recent report that came out from UNICEF that says that 21,000 children are unaccounted for, missing, presumed dead, or buried under rubble. And that adds, there's more adults in those numbers as well. And as you've said, the death toll right now is about 37,718, I believe, with more than 85,000 wounded. And so the consensus among the humanitarian orgs is that this is just massively undercounted. And I've heard some estimates that people who have family over there believe that over 100,000 people have been killed thus far.
Man, well, you never know exactly what it is, these kind of estimates, and I'm always a little wary of the high ones, but I know it's got to be steadily growing, and the fact that the numbers stopped growing while the war kept continuing is, obviously very suspicious. And when you talk about, did they say, by the way, their methodology there on the 21,000 missing children that is presumed buried alive or bulldozed already to oblivion?
No, it's essentially the Gaza Health Ministry is saying that these people are unaccounted for. Some of them are missing because they can't find, their parents can't locate them. I believe about 4,000 of them are estimated to be dead. But again, because there's so much rubble and so much of the Strip has been destroyed, these are just the children that we know can't be found. It was Save the Children that carried out the study. They're presumed to be in mass graves or under the rubble, or, as I said, separated from their parents. And many have been detained and taken into these prisons that the Israelis have. And the parents obviously have no way of contacting them. So these are just the ones that have been reported. And we've also gotten numerous stories out of these detainment centers of Palestinians being tortured, including by being raped, waterboarded, burned. The callousness and macabre stories coming out of these prisons is really unspeakable. And so you can just imagine what's going through these parents' minds as they know that their children are being held hostage by the IDF. With those kinds of stories spreading. We also even UN workers have been tortured by the Israelis already. We know that there was a report that UNRWA put out saying that many of their own employees had said they have been tortured into the Israelis were trying to get them to make false accusations against their own colleagues for having been involved in the October 7th attack, which several Western countries just accepted at face value from an Israeli dossier that contained no evidence to prove those allegations, and then cut funding to the primary UN agency for the Strip, which just tighten the starvation siege because they have the most infrastructure and the most ability to distribute aid throughout the Strip.
All right, it's Anti-War Radio. I'm Scott Horton talking with Connor Freeman from Antiwar.com. And there's so much going on with this story here. It's such a nightmare what you described there. I want to reiterate, and I know I say this just about every week, but for people who aren't familiar, the three most important newspapers in America, the Post, the Times, and the Journal, have all run stories where they made direct comparisons to the devastation of Dresden and Hamburg at the hands of the Americans and British in World War II with the firebombing and the absolute destruction. Now, in this case, it's important to clarify that they mostly chased everybody out of there with a bit lower level bombing than that, although still slaughtering many people, before completely leveling the place. So it's not kind of all in 2 nights and that many people dying kind of all at once in 2 nights. But then again, the totals are basically equivalent over 6 months, and the devastation and essentially the erasure of entire neighborhoods and, greenhouses and barns and farm equipment and all the things that, are making their economy go and just completely erasing city blocks, bombing them, and then bulldozing them right out of there, cleaning the slate, the way that they have done. Essentially deliberately made it impossible for people to come home at the same time that they're killing them by the tens of thousands. They're just completely demolishing the place. And this is all on America's dime and all with America's protection. I don't know if Americans know that. Even England a lot of times votes against this stuff. It'll be America and Israel alone. And it ain't because we're the only good guys holding back the darkness. That ain't it. It's the other way around here, and it's as ugly as it could be. Hang on just 1 second for me here. You guys, I'm so proud to announce the publication of the Libertarian Institute's 14th book. It's Israel, winner of the 2003 Iraq Oil War, Undue Influence, Deceptions, and the Neocon Energy Agenda by Gary Vogler, former senior oil consultant and deputy senior oil advisor for U.S. forces during Iraq War II. Remember how I wrote in Enough Already about how Ahmed Chalabi sold the neoconservatives on a plan to rebuild the old British oil pipeline from Mosul and Kirkuk, Iraq to Haifa, Israel, if they would only get the United States to overthrow Saddam Hussein for him? And how they bought it because they are as dumb as they are corrupt? Well, Gary was there. As senior civilian consultant to the DoD and Iraqi oil ministry, he had a unique window and experience witnessing the Pentagon neocons and their machinations on behalf of Israel before and during that war. And it turns out that even though they did not get their pipeline, as Vogler demonstrates, the neocons and their Likudnik bosses figured out an effective plan B anyway. You are going to love Israel, winner of the 2003 Iraq Oil War by Gary Vogler. Available everywhere. Check it out along with our other great books at libertarianinstitute.org/books. Hey, y'all, let me tell you about Robertson Roberts Brokerage, Inc. Nobody trusts the U.S. dollar anymore. Foreign governments are stocking up on gold instead of $100 bills. 1, they know they need to, and 2, that means you need to too. Interest rates are up, but for some reason not much for savings accounts. Park your money there and watch Uncle Joe Biden just counterfeit its value away. You can see how the Fed is afraid to raise rates to beat inflation for fear of popping the current bubbles, at least before the election. So more inflation it will continue to be. Gold is your shield against monetary and price inflation, just like it always has been. Now Tim Fry and the guys over at Robertson Roberts are recommending gold over silver since the world's almost 200 governments are putting their own pressure on the price, which should help everyone else who makes similar calls on their own. Of course, Robertson Roberts can help you with platinum, palladium, and silver, as well as gold. Don't let the Fed and the war party inflate all your savings away. Look up Robertson Roberts at rrbi.co. That's rrbi.co. There's been a little bit of this going back, but I was really interested to see this new article in Haaretz by Benjamin Netanyahu's predecessor, Ehud Olmert, who was the heir of Ariel Sharon in the Kadima party. Sharon and Netanyahu had been in Likud together, but were rivals, of course, over minor differences. But when Sharon went into his coma, reins got passed to Olmert, and then he was in charge until Netanyahu came in at the same time Obama came to power there in 2009. So, but he seems to be dissenting more and more, and especially very starkly here, Connor, against Benjamin Netanyahu's policy, which just on the face of it right there, and I'd like to hear all the details, but they make it seem in American media like this is just the way it has to be. Remember, Donald Trump denounced Joe Biden for temporarily holding up delivery of 2,000-pound bombs that probably weren't even held up anyway. It's just a contest for how much worse they could make it between the two major party rivals for the presidency here again. But meanwhile, in Israel, the former prime minister, the most recent former prime minister, is harshly dissenting from the current policy. So please take us through that if you could.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Netanyahu is in a lot of trouble right now. He's facing all kinds of political vulnerabilities that threaten to collapse his fragile ruling coalition, which is filled with these ultra-Orthodox and extremist factions. But Olmert is piling on. I mean, this article that he wrote in Haaretz, he's accusing him of deliberately prolonging the war in Gaza with no no achievable objective and no deadline set, so that he says the war can eventually fail and then he can just blame the military for that. He also says that he's looking to expand the war to Hezbollah for what he called an all-out military confrontation, a direct war with Hezbollah in the north. And he says that he's ignoring the efforts of the French and the Americans to try and prevent that war from spilling over. He also talks about how, and it was good to see this. He doesn't express hardly any concern for the civilians being slaughtered by the tens of thousands in Gaza. But he does say that the settlers, he's blaming the settlers, but if you look at the numbers, the IDF is responsible for most of the over 500 Palestinians who've been murdered in the West Bank since October 7th. But what he said was, I accuse the prime minister of Israel taking deliberate actions meant to cause a widespread flare-up of violence in the West Bank, in the knowledge that this would trigger the expansion of war crimes against Palestinians who are not involved in terrorism in any way. Such crimes are already being committed by many Israelis. Usually these are not military conscripts, but rather private militias made up of thugs carrying guns that in most cases were given to them in a questionable process that demands legal review, in a move initiated by National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir. These weapons serve many of them in their riots and protect them when they brutalize Palestinians, burning their property and destroying the fields that are a source of life and sustenance, as well as directly killing innocent people. And we've already seen thousands of people have displaced. They've been carrying out ethnic cleansing in the Jordan Valley, as well as rural areas outside of Hebron. That began, very early on in the war. We saw entire villages outside Hebron depopulated. And when the settlers go in there, they'll be burning houses down, torching vehicles, and causing millions of dollars of property destruction that the Palestinians obviously don't have. And so the settlers have been running wild. As soon as the attack, the Hamas attack on Israel, and then the ensuing war began, the week after, when the war was only less than a week old. I always remember this story because it was so shocking. The Israeli settlers went and killed 3 Palestinian olive farmers, and then the Palestinians held a funeral the next day. So the settlers showed up and shot a father and a son to death in the funeral procession. And so it's been open season this entire time. And UNICEF declared last year to be the deadliest year on record for children in the West Bank. At this point, I believe it's roughly 150 or between 130 and 150 Palestinian children that have been killed so far. And it's 137. And those are just the numbers that we know of. 553 people have been killed overall. And the other thing that Olmert discusses is that that Netanyahu is deliberately avoiding any kind of a ceasefire deal that would bring all the hostages home from Gaza, because he says it would prevent a total victory. But as I said, he wants the war. He's saying that Netanyahu wants the war to go on indefinitely and blame any failures on the military. But of course, he's also saying that it's destroying their economy. The war has already cost Israel $60 billion. The U.S., the estimates are, has sent over $6.5 billion worth of weapons, including $3 billion just last month. After and that last month was when they invaded Rafah. And displaced over 1 million people, as I mentioned earlier, which that was supposed to be the red line, attacks on populated areas in Rafah, which they've been doing ever since. And of course, Washington has done nothing about that. He also accused Netanyahu of destroying the relationship, the political, military, security relationship with the United States. And he emphasizes that our entire Air Force relies completely on American aircraft, fighter planes, transport planes, refueler planes, and helicopters. All of Israel's air power is based on America's commitment to defend Israel. And I think he's exaggerating. I mean, Yoav Gallant just visited Washington and met with Jake Sullivan and Antony Blinken and Lloyd Austin, and they all were, prostrating themselves and saying we have an ironclad commitment to Israel, and we're just basically saying that we're in this to the end. And so there hasn't been. And Yoav Gallant, along with Benjamin Netanyahu, the ICC is seeking warrants for to put these men on trial for war crimes. So it's just, again, we're continuing with creating our own diplomatic isolation by standing behind Israel as they genocide the Palestinians. And, it doesn't appear that really the Joe Biden administration is clearly taking all these attacks from Netanyahu about, oh, you're holding up weapons. They're taking it on the chin and going, we don't know what he's talking about. They're apparently basically what happened is we had sent over almost 250 shipments of weapons to the Israelis since the war began. But as the pace of operations has slowed down, because Netanyahu is saying the intense, the more intense operations in Gaza are going to wind down soon, and he's going to relocate some of the forces to the north to prepare for war with Hezbollah. We've been hearing Israeli officials and American officials warning about this for months now, but it looks more and more like they're going to escalate against Hezbollah and open up a whole new front in earnest with Lebanon. And so basically the pace of weapons shipments has now reverted to the way American officials describe it as a normal pace. The only shipment that has been held up is this one shipment of 2,000-pound bombs. And we've already sent thousands of 2,000-pound bombs to Israel, which even the New York Times has reported in the early days of the war, they were routinely dropping 2,000-pound bombs on Palestinian civilians in the so-called safe zones. So Biden did this as basically a political stunt, the same way he did when he, claimed that Israel had put forward this ceasefire proposal that was really his, which is completely fallen apart, again, because of Netanyahu's obstinance and for the same priorities that Olmert is laying out here. This was just Biden's attempt to try and look like he was doing something to rein in Israel, because, more than half of the people that voted for Biden in 2020 believe he's complicit in genocide right now. And so this is obviously going to devastate him in the election. As you mentioned, tonight, the first presidential debate, or maybe the only one that we're going to see in this season, is taking place on CNN, and we're going to watch both Trump and Biden try and prove who can be more subservient to Benjamin Netanyahu. And Netanyahu is using Trump's rhetoric about finishing the job, which is genocidal in the rhetoric. Obviously, we can see what they're talking. I mean, the job is slaughtering the Palestinians, making the Strip completely uninhabitable and ethnically cleansing them to Egypt, the other Arab states, or anywhere else they can go. We've already seen Likud officials and even members of Netanyahu's opposition saying, writing in the Wall Street Journal that Western countries, if you're so concerned about humanitarian, if you're such humanitarians and you care about these people, why don't you take them? And so basically, I mean, Olmert is saying that, all the things that most analysts, who are paying attention to this are saying, that Netanyahu is making sure that the war goes on indefinitely. And this comes as even Shaki Hanegbi, Netanyahu's national security advisor, is saying what Daniel Hagari, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, the IDF spokesman, said recently, which is that this this stuff about eradicating Hamas is impossible. Hamas is an idea. It's a concept. It lives in the hearts of the people. You cannot defeat them. You cannot destroy their military capabilities. And we've already heard those same arguments made by U.S. and Israeli intelligence, and even the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Charles Q. Brown, has made it reminds me of McChrystal's insurgent math, saying that all these civilians you're killing, all you're doing is increasing Hamas's ranks. So, basically, more and more people, including within the Israeli political spectrum, are coming to the realization, led by the IDF, that the way the war is being carried out is impractical at best.
Well, and think about that. I mean, from the very beginning, the idea was, well, we're not going to hunt down the leadership and get them or bargain for them. No, we're going to eradicate Hamas entirely by doing this massive movement of the Palestinian people, all of them to the south of the Gaza Strip, and then we're going to force them back north again, and we're going to root them out of their tunnels, and we're going to do this and that until they're all gone. And since that was the premise, that no Hamas must be left standing, this is the war that they fought in the name of that goal and that strategy, which, of course, was always bankrupt. It, of course, was always a lie, just as much as the IDF is now accusing it of being and accusing Netanyahu of telling it, that that's where this is headed, that we're going to be Hamas-free. No. So instead, what do we got? Again, nobody knows how many tens of thousands, but north of 40,000 dead people, mostly innocent civilians, little kids buried alive, and for nothing. And at the end of the day, they're right back where they started from again, which is, torturing these people that they can't quite get rid of after stealing their country from them. It's really incredible.
Benjamin Netanyahu's wife is now accusing the military of fomenting a coup against him, as is his son.
Inshallah.
Netanyahu is accusing Itamar Ben-Gvir of leaking state secrets. And so now there's a fight between Jewish Power and Likud. They made a point. I guess there's this move to try and make ministers take lie detector tests. And they said, we'll do that if it applies to people with pacemakers, referring to Netanyahu. The High Court this week just passed, they just ruled unanimously, all 9 justices, that the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox community, are no longer exempt from the mass enlistment policy, the mandatory mass enlistment, and they're now going to be subject to conscription. So that's going to cause major problems for Netanyahu's coalition. He relies on those ultra-Orthodox parties. I mean, not just the most extremist ones like Jewish Power and Religious Zionism, led by Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, respectively. But I mean, the Shah's party and the United Torah Judaism party are completely up in arms about this. And Likud says they're going to, introduce a bill to try and reverse this, but it's not clear Netanyahu has enough time to pull that off. One of his opposition parties, it's a real oxymoron, Movement for Quality Government. That's the name of a party in Israel. They led the petition to the High Court for this, and now they're saying this is a huge, achievement for justice and equality, that everybody is subject to military slavery in the society, and they're demanding that Gallant begin drafting the ultra-Orthodox immediately. And they've been living on the dole from the rest of the citizens this whole time, and they've been exempt from the draft. And so it's caused major protests over the last several months, and a lot of political upheaval in Israel. And so, again, Netanyahu is just facing a lot of problems right now, as Bezalel Smotrich, the financial minister, has been making some moves. And a speech was recently reported on that got leaked by CNN and the New York Times, actually, about how they are moving forward with plans to annex Area C of the West Bank. And basically what he's done is he runs he's got civilians working for him in his special position in the defense ministry, where he acts as a de facto governor of the West Bank. Mm-hmm. And now it's called the Settlements Administration. So now he has civilians working for him who agree with, they're like him. They're for full annexation of Judea and Samaria, as they call it. Yeah. And they're going to take the whole West Bank.
Maybe the silver lining is we'll get that military coup over there, and it'll be way better than the democracy in Israel, which is so horrible. But we can only joke and hope. But we're out of time. Thank you so much for your time again on the show, Connor. Great stuff.
Absolutely. Thank you, Scott.
All right, you guys, that's Connor Freeman. You can see why I got him covering Israel Palestine for us over at antiwar.com and the Institute, right? Ain't he great? All right, that's it for the show. I'm Scott Horton. This is Anti-War Radio. Find the full interview archive, including my brand new interview with Julian Assange's brother, and a bunch more stuff at scotthorton.org and youtube.com/Scott Horton Show. And please donate and support KPFK 90.7 FM in LA. That's at kpfk.org, or call 818-985-2711. And I'll see you guys next Thursday.